If you're a long-time fan of this channel, you probably know a fair bit about ARC Troopers. They were the Republic's ultimate soldiers, an elite cadre of 100 clones bred to be almost exactly like Jango Fett, with no personality tempering whatsoever. They served the Republic with distinction during the Clone Wars. All of them except Alpha-02. He was an aberrant clone, and though he too fought on the battlefields of the Clone Wars, he didn't fight for the Republic. He fought for the Separatists, and he raised an army of Mandalorians to do it, forever changing the shape of Mandalorian society. In this video, we'll be telling his story.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Clone Masters of Kamino were exceedingly good at their job, but even they couldn't prevent the occasional aberrant clone. In the general clone population, aberrance rates were 3.5%. For their elite soldiers, that rate dropped to 1%. In the original batch of 100 Alpha class ARC Troopers, that 1% represented Alpha-02. Unlike the other ARC Troopers who accepted the Kaminoans' programming and developed loyalty to the Republic, Alpha-02 was completely unresponsive to indoctrination, and he was even more independent than the other ARC Troopers. Like with all aberrant clones, the Kaminoans put him through reconditioning before considering euthanasia, and it seemed to work. After reconditioning, Alpha-02's aberrant personality traits seemed to have gone away. But it was all just an act. Alpha-02, who by that point had taken the nickname Spa, was no fool, and he knew what would happen to him if the Kaminoans thought his reconditioning had failed. He faked his recovery by trying to blend in with the other clones, and he did a good enough job that the Kaminoans didn't notice that his independent streak hadn't gone away. For a time, Spa was able to fit in with his brothers, but that all changed in 24 BBY, when he was biologically 17. That year, Spa overheard a conversation about one of Jango Fett's exploits, and it triggered a rush of memories. As it turned out, Spa wasn't just independent and unresponsive to indoctrination, he had all of Jango Fett's memories too. Upon realizing this, Spa knew he had to get off Kamino. To this end, he began faking insanity and mental breakdowns to meet with Midge Guillemot, a Mandalorian clone commando trainer that worked as a doctor for injured ARCs and commandos. Guillemot was sympathetic to Spa's plight and talked Jango into smuggling the aberrant clone off-world. Jango hid Spa in the cargo hold of Slave 1 and dropped him off at a spaceport during a bounty hunt. Thus, Spa became the GAR's first deserter. At first, Spa wandered around the Outer Rim, taking small-time bounty hunting jobs to keep himself afloat. But when the Clone Wars began and Jango died in his first battle, Spa decided that he had a more important purpose. Jango, as Spa knew well, had been the last of the true Mandalorians who'd been wiped out after a civil war with the Death Watch at the Battle of Galadran. After the battle, all of the survivors save Jango had been killed by the Jedi. With Jango dead, Spa was the only one who remembered the ways of the true Mandalorians, and he became determined to resurrect them and restore the Mandalorians to glory. Spa traveled to Mandalore and allied with Fen Shaisa and Toby Dullah, who became his right-hand men. On the urging of Shaisa and Dullah, Spa claimed to be the son of Jango Fett, and thus the rightful claimant to the title of Mandalore. He took the name Mandalore the Resurrector, and in the early years of the Clone Wars, he gathered over 200 followers, a mix of local police and former Death Watch members. They called themselves the Mandalorian Protectors, and they sought to return Mandalorian society to the old ways that had been abandoned under the rule of the pacifist New Mandalorian faction. The New Mandalorians remained in control of Mandalorian space until 20 BBY, when Duchess Satine Kryze was killed and the New Mandalorian faction was effectively dissolved. For the rest of the Clone Wars, several factions vied for control of Mandalorian space. Maul's Shadow Collective and Bo-Katan Kryze's Death Watch loyalists fought over the ruins of New Mandalorian society, while Spa and the Protectors took control of rural Mandalore and many other worlds in the sector. All three of these factions claimed to be the true rulers of Mandalore, but from mid-20 BBY to early 19 BBY, it was the Protectors who controlled most of Mandalorian space. This was because, unlike the other factions, the Protectors had allies. From the very beginning of his quest to rebuild the Mandalorians, Spar knew he wanted in on the Clone Wars. War was the Mandalorian way of life, and Mandalore the Resurrector wasn't going to let the biggest war the galaxy had ever seen pass him by. But beyond that, Spar had an agenda. He wanted revenge on the Jedi for the Battle of Galadran. Despite the fact that the Jedi at Galadran had been led by a certain Master Dooku, Spar and his Protectors joined the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Backed by legions of BL series Battle Legionnaires, a limited run line of battle droids at the CIS customed for the Protectors' exclusive use, Spar's followers went to war against the Republic. The Mandalorian Protectors acted as elite shock troopers for the CIS, carrying out covert missions and devastating lightning strikes on Republic forces across the galaxy. The Protectors massacred Republic troops at New Holsters, Dadja, Null, and New Bornelix, and during the Outer Rim sieges, they even launched an attack on Kamino itself. They didn't always win their battles, but they were never really trying to. Their objective was to do as much damage as possible and to kill as many Jedi and clones as they could, and they did their job well. Unfortunately for the Protectors, they were a little too good at their job, and Darth Sidious began to consider them a threat to his plans for the Clone Wars. After several unsuccessful attempts by Republic intelligence to assassinate Spar, in 19 BBY, Sidious enlisted the Mandalorian Protectors to capture Senator Padme Amidala at Norval 2. The mission, however, was a ruse, and the Protectors arrived at Norval 2 to find Republic forces lying in wait. The Mandalorians didn't stand a chance. Only 3 of them survived: Spar, Fen Shaisa, and Toby Dulla. Norval 2 left Spar shell-shocked, and he was never the same again. He gave up the title of Mandalore and refused to take it up again despite Fen Shaisa's attempt to convince him otherwise. After the end of the Clone Wars, Spar returned to Mandalore, where he hung around with Cal Scarada and his definitely not a cult extended family of clone deserters were trying to find a way to reverse the clones' accelerated aging. Spar took interest in the project and volunteered himself as a guinea pig for anything the Scaradas wanted to try, but it's unknown if anything ever came of it. At any rate, Spar didn't stay with the Scaradas for long. Even before Norval 2, he had been struggling to cope with having 2 completely different sets of memories, but the trauma and shock of that last battle worsened his condition. Spar began to succumb to clone madness, steadily becoming unsure of what was or wasn't real. As this psychosis worsened, Spar made his way to the Extracarium Nebula, where he ran into Eileen Vel, the estranged daughter of Boba Fett. Vel mistook Spar for her father and shot him on sight, killing him. As it turned out, Vel wasn't the only one to confuse Spar with Boba either. Years later, some accounts of the Mandalorian Protectors claimed that it had been Boba Fett who led the Protectors in the Clone Wars. As an out-of-universe note, there's a simple reason for this. The entire character of Spar was actually created as a retcon. The story of the Mandalorian Protectors and their role in the Clone Wars comes from an expanded universe comic from the early 80s, which described how Boba Fett had led the Mandalorians in fighting for the Empire during the Clone Wars until the Emperor ordered them to capture a young Princess Leia, sending them into a trap that destroyed most of the unit. Obviously, this was incompatible with the prequels, but since this particular comic was fundamental to establishing a lot of the lore surrounding Mandalorians, the offending details were retconned. Instead of fighting for the Empire, the Protectors fought for the CIS. Instead of trying to capture Leia at Norval 2, they were sent after Padme, and instead of being led by Boba Fett, they were led by Spar, the self-proclaimed son of Jango. Isn't continuity fun? Anyway, that's the story of Spar, the ARC trooper who fought against the Republic. But what do you think? Are there other renegade clones you'd like us to talk about? Free to leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.